Welcome back to Crime Besties.
Welcome back. I'm Meg.
And I'm Emma, and it is lovely to have everybody back for another week. We're very excited to bring today's case to you.
It is, and it's another weird one with it being, it's not even a Saturday night like last time. We're now recording on a Monday night in our crazy busy lives. So just to make it extra strange tonight.
That's it. But we have had a very nice weekend, haven't we?
Yes. Yeah. And I sound like this, like I sound nasally and, hungover, but I'm not hungover, okay? I've got a cold, I promise. It's not left over from the weekend.
Not at all. We did have a very nice mum's night out with a few friends from our kids' school, so that was really nice.
It was so good to get out like that and just have a great night. It was really fun.
It was.
Cocktails are flowing.
That's it. And you actually had 2 nights out in a row this weekend, Meg.
I did. Yeah. Trying to do the right thing by work colleagues and then, friend stuff too. Back it up. No, I think I did well. I think I did well to back it up. But not that, we didn't go out like we used to. So it makes it much easier to to pull 2 in a row.
Yeah, that's it. It was a topic of conversation on Saturday night with everyone about the glory days and how it used to be. And there is absolutely no way we could get back there now. Like, to go out 2 nights in a row and have like a couple of really big nights, get up and go to uni the next day or go to work.
I was thinking about that the other night when we were talking about it. I'm like, I was crazy. I don't know how I did that because I was like going out like 5 nights a week, a good 5 nights a week, if not 6. Going to uni, which certainly wasn't the hardest thing in the world. I mean, most of that time was probably spent at the pub as well, let's be really honest. And but going to work, I mean, my Sunday mornings at work, I don't know how anyone could have let me in that place.
Oh, those were the days.
Yes. I can't imagine kids today doing what we used to do. I mean,
I don't think they could afford to do what we used to do.
That's so true. We were talking about that too on Saturday night. That got a cocktail these days. We'll say like standard like drink like a vodka and raspberry that you get out on a night out was like $5.50. I mean, God, what's that now? They've got to be over $10, I'm guessing.
For sure. Like I had a couple of cocktails on Saturday night that were over $20, I think. So you can't. Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's not a massive night out, that's for sure.
No, I mean, even a glass of wine these days out is not cheap.
No. But anyway, at least good times were had, and it's nice to have those nights out when the kids aren't around.
It is. I mean, and we managed to get home safely. All those bloody Uber drivers sometimes can be quite dodgy. We had not too bad a night with our Uber driver on Saturday night. He seemed pretty good. Didn't say a word, of course, but, drove fine. But my Friday night Uber, God, I was in the cab with a girlfriend driving and coming home, and, like, we're both, like, hanging on for dear life in the back seat, flying around everywhere, and, like, he kept, like, putting his foot on the brake. We'd be, like, full flying forward and then full flying back in our seats. And, he sort of, like, can't say anything. We were both sort of eyeballing each other going, what's going on here?
What do we do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh, mate, can you maybe not fling us around the
Oh, God.
the place?
I actually got out of the cab, out of the Uber at her place, and I only actually got like another 5 minutes down the road sort of thing, and she just says to me, just let me know if you get home safe, please.
Let me know if you get home safe. Yep. Yeah. We've all had those Uber drivers. Haven't we?
I mean, they're both really nice.
But nice people. But why become an Uber driver if driving isn't your thing?
Yeah, I don't know what the go is with that. They just seem to be generally not good drivers. Like, is it just that they're doing it so much that they get you, like, I don't know, like overconfident, or I don't know,
or just don't care anymore. I don't know.
I think it was the dude on the Friday night too. He was on the phone the whole time, which he turned to us and said to us, "Do you mind if I'm on the phone?" Like, I'm like, "Oh, no, like you do your thing, we'll chat," And he had his little earbud thing in and chatting away the whole time, just fine. But I don't know that he was concentrating that much on the road.
I was about to say, there you go. He was more interested in who he was talking to than actually driving properly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Fun times.
Yes.
Should we get into today's case?
Yes, this one is a goodie. Yeah.
Yeah, what are we talking about today?
Well, today we are going to be chatting about the Menendez brothers, which is a fascinating case. It was back in the late 80s that this took place, 1989, but then obviously bled well into the 90s with in terms of the trial and everything that went on afterwards. And it was one of those cases that became quite infamous in terms of like a bit like the OJ case. It was very similar timing to the OJ case, highly televised in the trial, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so
Talked about the other day. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, just to interject quickly there. This was
Yeah.
actually the first trial that was televised from start to end on US TV. So
Yeah.
this kind of set the precedent for then that, and it was very well watched by a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it really set the scene for OJ's trial, which came not that long after the Menendez brothers trial.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we were talking the other day about how like because it was so highly televised that like everyone knew about this case, it was like parodied in so many different ways in many movies that we then saw, like, the cable guy, like Ben Stiller in the background quite often on a TV would be Ben Stiller saying like both the brothers. I think he played both characters of
He
the brothers.
did.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
And there was the 30 Rock. Did you ever watch 30 Rock?
I loved 30 Rock.
It's one of my favorite
So
shows.
good. Yeah.
And there was Tracy Morgan in that. In one of the episodes, he was convinced that his children were going to kill him for their inheritance. Yes. And so he like coined the term that, he was going to be Menendized.
I love it. It's so good. Speaking of favorite TV shows, I actually have a bit of a link to this case with a favorite TV show of mine too.
Oh yeah.
The bow is long. Because this story was so well, known and liked and was so popularized in the media, Law and Order actually made a mini series about the show. And I'm sure you've watched it to prepare for today, or, even in the past, just for pure and utter entertainment.
Absolutely.
Loved it. Edie Falco plays the lawyer, so the Menendez brothers' lawyer, in this Law and Order miniseries about the case.
Yes.
And she plays Carmela in in my favorite TV show of all time, which is The Sopranos. So
yes,
there you go.
She was awesome in that series. So good. I think she was nominated for like an Emmy or something for it, I believe. Yeah. I can't remember if it was Golden Globe or an Emmy, whatever, but I think it was an Emmy. Yeah, she did such a good job. They look so much alike. The real deal and her looks so much alike.
I know. And even her mannerisms, she's awesome. I love her.
Yeah, no, she's good.
I love her attitude. I love her accent. I love the way she talks.
Yes.
So, yeah, shout out to that miniseries. And if anyone wants to sort of see a dramatization of events, and it's actually pretty factual. I mean, there's obviously a bit of creative license in there, but actually as far as these recreations of real life events go, it's actually pretty accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yes. I mean, having said all that, having laughs and what have you, this case was pretty horrific. I mean, it's not too many cases, I don't think, where children have murdered their own parents, and not only just murdered a parent, but murdered both parents. I reckon there'd be only a fair few of those across the world, I would suspect. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, I mean, there is a term for it, and it's called patricide.
Ooh.
So that's a term for killing your parents. So that's obviously, enough that it does have its own name. But yeah, these two brothers, as we've alluded to, killed both of their parents. So let's have a chat about the main players in the game.
Let's do that.
They are an interesting family in that Jose, so the parents are named Jose Menendez and Mary Louise Menendez. Mary Louise goes by the name of Kitty, and her maiden name was Anderson. They were married in 1963. And in 1968, they had their eldest son, Joseph Lyle Menendez, who goes by the name of Lyle. So we'll be referring to him for the rest of this as Lyle. And then they had Eric Galen Menendez in 1970. So the brothers are only a couple of years apart in age. And by all accounts, they were incredibly close, the two brothers. They had more than just a typical brotherly bond. I think they were very, very close to one another. And as the case, as we sort of talk more and more about the case, I think that becomes pretty evident as to why that's the case.
Sure.
Jose and Kitty, as I said, were married in 1963. They actually met at university at Southern Illinois College, where they were both attending at the time. Jose was a very talented athlete and scholar and academic. He emigrated from Cuba in 1944 to the United States with his family. I believe his family were quite wealthy, and they were an incredibly academic family in and of themselves, very sporty. It sounds like they just had, the whole package, really.
Yeah, very high expectations, I think, in general in the family, which then I think led to Jose's, demeanour and how he wanted to raise his own boys, for sure.
Yeah, the Menendez brothers definitely had high expectations set on them from a very young age to sort of achieve what I guess achieve highly in every endeavor,
every aspect,
academic and athletic and socially, and all of everything that goes with it, I guess.
Yeah.
Jose was a little bit, well, he was, I guess, in certain ways. He had the privilege of coming from a family with some money, but he then created and forged his own path and became quite, his career. He forged an amazing career for himself and ended up, in these multi-million-dollar jobs. And I guess at the time of his death, he was the CEO of Live Entertainment. Previous to that, he'd been an accountant for several large organizations. He'd worked for Hertz as a chief financial officer. And actually, this is a little tidbit of information that I came across when I was doing my research. So where they lived in Beverly Hills, the Menendez family, they actually lived really close to O.J. Simpson. So this is one of those full circle moments. Go back and have a listen to our O.J. two-parter if you haven't already, because it was great. If we don't say so ourselves. And that's a really fascinating story too.
Yeah.
But so Jose, as the CFO of Hertz, was the one who employed OJ to do the TV commercial that we talked about in our OJ episode.
He was a real groundbreaker in that, because previous to that, celebrities weren't used for endorsements like that. That was his idea. It was his idea to go, let's go out and get a celebrity to do this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because, first time for that. And then, as we were saying, the Menendez brothers ended up in a cell next door to OJ many moons later, and they're going, hey, I remember you. You used to come around to our house for barbecues and whatnot.
Someone. Crazy.
Right.
What? Imagine that.
I guess these people are the 1%ers, as in so many ways. 1%, they've killed people. They're murderers. They're amongst the wealthiest people, in the country. Anyway, Kitty was a homemaker by and large. I think when Kitty married Jose, there was a little bit of an expectation on his part that Kitty would play that role. And I think, from all accounts, she was happy to do that, in that she never really had a career, or certainly not in the field that she studied at university. I think she did a communications degree. People who knew her described her as a highly strung, really stressed person. She was on prescription antibiotics at the time of her death, and I believe had been for a very long time.
Did you say antibiotics or antidepressants?
Oh, did I say antibiotics?
You said antibiotics, but you meant antidepressants, yeah?
I 100% mean antidepressants. Antibiotics are on my mind because literally everyone in this household has been sick. Yeah, sorry about that, guys.
Just want to clarify.
Antibiotics, fine. I mean, as are antidepressants, but I meant antidepressants. Unfortunately, the murder happened in 1989, in August of 1989. And in 1987, so a couple of years prior, Kitty actually attempted suicide by overdosing on pills. Jose was not what I would call the most attentive or perfect husband.
He
was basically cheating on her from the moment they got together, certainly throughout the entirety of their marriage. And she just kind of, I mean, she knew about it, didn't really do much about it. Jose used his wealth and power to dictate the lives of, certainly of Kitty and the brothers and his sons, but also of members of his extended family.
For sure. Yeah, he helped. I mean, he helped out family members financially, though, and that. So I think that, you know, he held that over them. Then of like, well, if you want me to help you, you don't mention things that go on within my household. Which I think it was, you know, it was like this unspoken thing of like, well, I can't speak up because the guy's helping me out financially. How am I supposed to say, hey, don't treat your wife like that, but can I take that handout? Well, I think it was pretty well known that it was just, everyone knew it was going on, but you just don't talk about it.
Yeah. So I think it's probably worth popping a bit of a disclaimer in here too, that things that we're about to talk about are quite explicit in nature. It's talking about crimes against children and abuse against children and against like older adults or young adults, I suppose. So, you know, if this makes you feel uncomfortable, we completely understand, and it might not be the episode for you. But I guess from a very young age, Jose was actually perpetrating sexual crimes against Lyle and Eric. And neither of them knew about the other for a very, very, very long time.
It was fairly well known amongst family members and friends. It was obvious in that there was physical abuse and most definitely emotional abuse going on within the family. And again, one of those things that just everyone didn't talk about, but it was certainly well known. But then what was also then going on behind closed doors, what the boys claimed then in the trial, etc., is that there was sexual abuse occurring. It stopped for him at the age of 8. And so as you said, the boys didn't know. They were very much groomed and told by their father not to tell anyone about what was going on. And so the boys didn't talk about what was happening to each of them. And so I guess Lyle was under the impression it had stopped for him at 8. And what didn't happen to Eric. But that is basically the catalyst then of what was to come with this case, that 5 days prior to murdering their parents, Eric had confessed to Lyle that his dad that Jose had been sexually abusing him, and still was right up until then, had been sexually abusing him. So Lyle, being the older brother and incredibly protective, which can't blame him for that, decided that he would approach his father to get this to stop, which didn't go down well, as you can imagine. I mean, from his account of this, his dad basically said, if you breathe a word of this to anyone, you'll be cut off from me financially. And then it also stemmed to threats of his life being taken as well, and Eric's, so for both of them. So apparently over the course of those 5 days prior to the murder, there was numerous occasions where things blew up in the household verbally around the disclosure of this information between Eric and Lyle. So his dad was very much on high alert that this information was being potentially going to be put out publicly.
And that was a big deal for Jose. Appearances were everything.
Yeah.
They orchestrated, it's sort of like, that Instagram worthy life that we see now so often where, you look at somebody's life on Instagram and it looks perfect and idyllic and amazing, and the photos are posed and everyone looks lovely and the children are nicely dressed, but you don't know what's going on behind that picture. And it was a very similar facade that the Menendez family were putting out into society. The boys appeared to be these amazing, upstanding young men who were wonderful at sport and academically gifted. We now know, though, that their parents were actually doing their homework for them because they couldn't do it themselves. They weren't, I don't think they were necessarily, complete and utter dead shits or anything, but
Eric was the more intelligent academically.
Lyle even then, I don't think he was a Rhodes Scholar.
No, and by no means, no. But because Lyle was he got kicked out of the university, not kicked out, but his grades weren't up to standard for Princeton.
That was Lyle, yeah.
That was Lyle.
Yeah.
So, Daddy had to fork out a bit of money to make sure he stayed on the books at the
he actually plagiarized. So in the first 6 months of him attending Princeton, well, first of all, it took him a long time to get accepted into Princeton. God only knows how that even happened. Like, did Daddy pay some money and that college entry scandal that went on in the US?
For the university so that he got in. Yeah.
Well, he did. That's known, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, right. And then, so within his first 6 months, though, of attending Princeton, Lyle was caught plagiarizing an assignment or something. And to get him out of that, or so that would stay quiet, Jose paid the university $50,000.
Oh, then maybe he got in legit, but then didn't stay there legit.
I don't know that he did get in legit. I couldn't find anything to say otherwise.
But he got a tennis scholarship to get in. I don't know that he got in on academics, but he had to maintain academics to keep the spot. And that was where that was dropped off. And so therefore it was that Jose stepped in and gave the university a bit of money. But I don't know. Like, I don't know. $50,000 back in that day was maybe a lot of money to one of those universities.
Yeah, so I think $50,000. I did look this up. I think $50,000 back at that time would be roughly like between $200,000 and $250,000 in today's money.
Yeah,
so it's still a decent chunk of money.
Yeah,
I mean, we know Jose was worth somewhere around like the $14 to $16 million mark back in the day. So that would have been, 2.5 times that. Roughly, and that's what you get for today's money. So he was incredibly wealthy. It's probably worth noting at this point while we're talking about money that when the time came to distribute his estate after his death, he didn't have a lot of liquid assets. So there wasn't a lot of cash in the bank. I mean, there was, when I say not a lot, I think it sort of all amounted to the tune of about $2 million. Right. And they actually do not know to this day where the rest of his money is. So it's suspected that it's in offshore accounts here, there, and everywhere. Nobody knows how to access it, where it is.
It's just sitting somewhere.
So it's very well hidden, and that's
someone's got to know.
Well, if they know, they're not saying, and fair call. I wouldn't either. Well,
flawed at that. Like, what? You've got to have some sort of exit plan on that sort of money, surely. Like, how do you get that money out then if you off the top, like he didn't know his kids were going to murder him. What if he just had a car accident the next day?
But he probably didn't care. He probably didn't care.
Yeah, true. Well, there's a lot of money just to sit somewhere though, isn't it? Like not have anything. Okay, I'm on this. I need to find out how I can get this money.
Okay, then we can retire and just podcast full time.
Oh, I'm here for it. We'd totally hyperfixate that and find out what we do.
Yeah, totally. And then we wouldn't have to record on a Monday night after work and after doing all the things all day. Anyway, back to the case. We can dream. So the boys exhibited behaviours, throughout their life that I guess we now know in hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, that it really did reflect what they'd been through and the experiences that they'd had. I'm mostly referring to Lyle exhibiting these symptoms, but Eric certainly had his own set of challenges. As a 14-year-old boy, Lyle was still playing with stuffed animals. He was still wetting the bed, which it's one of the factors of the McDonald triad. I think we've discussed the McDonald triad before, or you and I certainly have privately if we haven't discussed it on the podcast yet. And it will come up time and time again.
You and me. So, yeah, let's discuss that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the McDonald triad, which is also known as the sociopathy triad, accounts for 3 factors that are linked to homicidal or sexually predatory behavior, and they're generally demonstrated prior, or generally when the person is a child, into young adulthood, I suppose. And the three factors are cruelty to animals, obsession with fire setting, and persistent wetting of the bed after the age of 5.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that we have no evidence of the other two factors for Lyle aside from the bedwetting and whether there was more going on than this. We do know that he'd been assaulted by his father throughout his very, very young years.
I would say too that like the behaviours there are probably more indicative of the sexual abuse, which can then also lead to other violent behaviours.
That's it.
In that, persistent wetting the bed, regression in play, those kind of things are indicators that there is sexual assault. Because the other one that is there is evidence of is that he was sexually like appropriately sexual with people, in that there was his cousin came forward saying that at quite a young age, I think maybe similar around about the 13, 14 sort of age group, that he actually put moves sort of on her, which was very uncomfortable for her. So that sort of indicates as well that there's that sexual nature to things. The regression in his play and the bedwetting would indicate sexual abuse.
Yeah. The incident with his female cousin was interesting because he actually sort of made 2 moves. They were wrestling and he tried to take off her clothes, and she sort of screamed and he stopped. And then he tried to like kiss her and she said no. And then, it just kind of never went from there. So it's like he tried it. She pulled back, or she, expressed the fact that she didn't want to do it, and that
just
was
in an abnormal sort of play, like in that, I guess that rough and tumble play, what that was treated like by his father in that moment with what normal kids play like, was then in his mind it was natural for the next step to be clothes being removed. So it's that real head fuck that his dad's done to him in that, unfortunately, that's coming through. That's sad.
So sad. It's so sad. Look, the boys really wanted to live up to Jose's expectations, and one of the things that he insisted on was that they were good at sport, and they both chose to pursue tennis as their sport of choice, and they'd practice all the time. Of course, they lived in an absolutely beautiful $4 million home in Beverly Hills, which had a tennis court. They had private coaching, and by all accounts, they were quite good tennis players. I don't know that they were ever necessarily ranked or anything, but I know they definitely played internationally. At least it must have been on some kind of amateur circuit.
Yeah. I believe too, like at one stage, I think Lyle started losing his hair, and his dad was really, really annoyed about this. And it was clearly, obviously, a bit of that, the outsider, what their perception of that his son was, I don't know if that like indicated some sort of weakness, because he was losing his hair, or that he didn't fit the standard of like what a young man should look like, and all those sorts of things, that he actually made sure that Lyle wore a toupee to cover up the fact that he was starting to lose his hair.
And despite how close Eric and Lyle were, Eric didn't actually know that Lyle wore a toupee until after they'd murdered their parents.
Wow. Yep. Like, I mean, that shows that shame, doesn't it, over those sorts of things, how their father obviously put that into their brains. Oh.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Those poor kids. I mean, there was still a fair whack of nepotism in the family. So when Lyle was sort of suspended from Princeton for 12 months after his plagiarism blip, so Dad paid the fine, but he also got a 12-month suspension. During that time, Jose, by this stage, was already working at Live Entertainment, and Lyle got to work there. I mean, step into a role that your dad's sort of created for you,
Oh, I
company's
don't think he was
created
working
for
in the
you.
mailroom or anything, was he? Like he wasn't really like working at the bottom, I don't think.
No, I certainly don't think he started at the bottom, but he didn't really make a good name for himself.
Yeah.
He would just not show up for work sometimes, or he'd get in late. His work ethic was terrible. And I guess the boys had really had, the boys, had most things handed to them on a silver platter. So there was this real dichotomy in their life. They had a father who was abusing them sexually, emotionally, and then yet they also lived this incredibly privileged life financially,
Yeah.
never wanted for anything. The day before the murders took place, they'd actually gone out on a boat on a family like shark. I think they were looking for sharks, like a shark
Like a touring or
watching
something. Yeah.
tour. Interestingly, the captain of that boat said that none of them spoke to one another. They all kind of sat at
Mm.
different well, the boys I think stayed together, but Kitty was at one end of the boat on her own and Jose was at another, and there was a lot of tension there. So why they wanted to do things as a family, if that was the state of affairs, I don't know. I mean,
God.
I guess keeping in mind that they just had 4 days before that had a conversation with the boys about the abuse, or the boys had
Mm.
confronted Jose about the abuse. Maybe there was still some there would have been residual tension from that conversation.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that I was really curious about actually was whether Kitty knew and
Mm.
what she knew, what she did about the abuse. By all accounts, she knew.
Yeah.
And as a mother, I just,
Can't.
how you could know that
Mm.
and not do anything about it.
Well, I think it was the Barbara Walters interview with the brothers, which was after they'd been convicted.
They were in prison when she did that interview, weren't
Yeah,
they?
they did
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it was actually filmed in prison.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to see Eric actually speak about that fact that it was in those 5 days that it dawned on him that his mum knew, and didn't step in. Obviously, he'd gone for, like, I mean, Lyle had put up with it until he was 8. You're looking at Eric putting up with it until he was 18. To think that his mother for those 18 years had never once stepped in and stopped this from happening and knew it was happening. And for that to register with him to go, she's known this whole time. He apparently then at that point couldn't see the difference between his dad and his mother. They became one, was the one in his mind, that they were both equally the same perpetrator.
Yeah.
And I can fully understand that psychologically, that, oh, well and good that that dad's the perpetrator of the physical sexual abuse, but to have the person in your life who is supposed to be your most strongest protector not step up for you in that moment and stop it and know all about it, that's got to really hit home that you're like,
And
it's got to, I don't know, in a way, what your worth is to that person, your family.
For sure.
Yeah.
And from what I've heard, I think Eric was really, really close to his mum. So yeah, that is just, I mean, it's a betrayal on so many levels.
Yeah.
So the same cousin who Lyle sort of had made those inappropriate moves on, I guess, Lyle actually disclosed to her his abuse a little bit later on. And at the time, she ran and went and found her auntie, Kitty, and told her what Lyle had disclosed to her. And Kitty just brushed her off. And the cousin says now that she just assumed that because she'd told Kitty and then she'd heard nothing else about it, she never heard from the boys again, from either of them, about the abuse, that Kitty had done something about it and it was all over and done with, and it was finished, and we just didn't talk about it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then to find out as an adult, like she was a few years, I think, older than the boys, to find out after they'd perpetrated these crimes and then, subsequently at the trial, that the abuse persisted beyond her disclosure to Kitty. I mean, the guilt.
Yeah.
It's horrid.
Yeah. Absolutely. But should we get into the actual day on the event of the murders pretty full on. So as we said, like there's this 5-day build up really to this is what brothers have put forward of this knowledge within the family. And so the boys were basically, I keep saying the boys, I shouldn't, because they were 18 and 21 at the time. So they weren't boys, they were adults at this point, but still living in their parents' home. And obviously felt very controlled by their father, particularly in terms of, I think, because of the physical and emotional abuse and the sexual abuse, but also financially. They were very much feeling that they had no way out. There was no way out of this, and so they had conspired that they would kill their dad, and they felt that they had no other options. They were going to get killed if they didn't kill. So they went to buy guns, and which just blows my mind. America, please, with the guns. They went to go and buy them in the state they were in Los Angeles, and it turned out that they had to wait to be able to get them there. So they went to the next state over, I believe, and were able to buy these massive shotguns. Like, what were they called? Did you have it there? What they were?
I wrote it down. Look, I'm not a gun person, so I had to actually Google what this gun looked like and what a shotgun actually looks like.
Yeah.
But they purchased 2 Mossberg 12 gauge shotguns.
Yeah. They're massive. Like, you have to do a full, pump thing to get the next one going. Yeah. The pellet thing, the bullets were, a couple of inches long. They would do some serious damage to you. But when they first bought them, they came with these pellet things, but I guess that'd be some sort of blank. Like they were called bird bullets.
I think they were like a rubber kind of pellet or something.
Yeah, and which wouldn't injure someone that much. So they had to then go and get different ammo that can get full blown kill your ammo stuff. Like, I'm not a gun person. I've got no idea of the lingo, but
I know, like a live round or something. I don't know.
That sounds right. Yeah,
doesn't it?
Good work. Yes, these giant shotguns. They went and purchased 1 each of those. So I mean, this all goes to premeditation for this murder. That it was a couple of days prior to them doing this. When it got to the day of, they had planned to go out for the evening to go and watch a movie and go to dinner. And I think there was a bit of a row between them and the parents. And so I think it was about 10 o'clock in the evening, Kitty and Jose had gone down to the den to watch TV and have some ice cream and blueberries. So they were just having a fairly regular evening. But Lyle and Eric decided this was the moment that they needed to get rid of them. And so they went and filled their shotguns with the ammunition. And the words of Eric and Lyle at the Barbara Walters interview was that they just walked in and started shooting, because if they paused at any moment, they would have not gone through with it, which I find really interesting.
Me too. It's like they felt like they had no other choice, like they had to do this because they could not continue on otherwise.
Yeah. So they began shooting straight away. They hit Jose first, and he ended with his life. I think they shot him 5 times. With the worst shot was at the back of the head, which left a gaping hole in the back of his head that was large enough for a man's hand to fit, a fist to fit inside.
A fist in, yeah.
So it was a close range shot to the back of the head that was what killed him. Yeah. Apparently, Kitty was absolutely beside herself and was screaming, trying to get out of the way. The boys shot her, I believe to begin with, it might have been 6 to 8 shots they got into her before they realised they ran out of ammunition. And she wasn't dead yet.
So she crawled along the floor.
They went out to their car again, refilled the shotguns with more ammunition, and went back in and continued to shoot at Kitty.
Well, a close range shot right to her cheek.
Right up to her cheek. They held the gun to her cheek and shot her to the point where she was unrecognisable from the gunshots. And I think they ended up shooting her 10 times in total.
Yes, so it was 10.
Absolutely horrific. So the boys at this point are sitting there with their dead parents in this horrific scene. Their assumption was that the cops, with somebody in the neighbourhood, would hear this. I mean, the gunshots would have been very loud. They assumed that someone in the neighbourhood would hear that and the cops would arrive immediately. You know, they'd be hearing sirens within minutes and that'd be that. And they'd be, I guess their expectation was that they would then be able to have the cops come in and then go, we had no other option. This is what happened. We shot our parents. You know, they weren't going to lie at that point. They were just going to fess up to the fact that they had no other choice but to. It was a defensive thing. They killed their parents. But no cops arrived. So they didn't know what to do. And so they jumped in a shower, washed off. They ended up getting in the car and driving. They dumped the shells from the ammunition over a canyon. They dumped a bag of the clothes that they'd been wearing. They dumped the shotguns, I believe, as well. Yep. Yeah. Got rid of those. And then went out and bought ticket stubs to the movie that they were planning to go see. I believe they went to dinner. And then close to midnight, they came home again. And at this point was when they rang the police.
Yep.
And so you can go online and you can check out their 911 call to the police. And it was made at about 10 to midnight, I think it was. And look, we 100% know that they did this. They are not hiding that fact at this day. So we can feel free to judge this 911 call, unlike usually where we say, oh, you can't judge people on a 911 call. We'll judge away.
Yeah, because you never know how you're going to react if you're in the same situation. Well, yeah, we know the outcome of this one. So Lyle makes the phone call and he is incoherent. He's beside himself, or seemingly. I mean, you would be beside yourself though, wouldn't you? Even if
I guess if
you've murdered your parents,
you know, monster versus defensive, you know, like as in if you're the monster, it's fake. If you're not the monster and you genuinely felt like this was your only option in life, then yeah, I guess it is real. And you would be beside yourself.
Well, Eric sort of overacted.
Well, he'd had the acting classes. I mean, he should be able to do this far better.
Yeah, that's it. And he was banging his head against the pavement out the front and making a real scene. Yeah. Just two things of note here that I just thought we should have a quick chat about before we move beyond it.
For sure.
There were two things that the boys did that also speak to premeditation, or at least them thinking about how they were going to get themselves out of this. The first one was that they decided when they sort of realized, I think, that, oh my God, the police aren't coming, we're going to have to come up with a different story and figure out what we're going to do. They actually ended up shooting both of their parents in the left kneecap because the story that they decided they'd come up with is that it was a mob hit.
Yeah.
Given Jose's, I guess, ties to the entertainment industry and the people that he surrounded himself with.
It was certainly not unreasonable.
It wasn't unreasonable, and the cops believed it.
Yeah.
Like when they interviewed Lyle and Eric not long after, well, very soon after the murders, they said, who do you think might have done this to your parents? And they both were like, maybe you should check out the mob. And the cops were like, oh yeah, fair call. Like, yeah, their left kneecaps were shot.
Yeah.
Totally.
There was some story even where Lyle said, you know, oh look, I've spoken to my uncle who's spoken to the person, and we're not in any danger, so it's okay. You don't have to like protect us, the children. The mob have said that we're safe. Like, and they bought that. They totally bought that information.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously. The other thing worth noting though as well, and this sort of goes back a little bit of time as well, is that Eric and a friend of his actually wrote a screenplay in which the main characters, who were two brothers, murdered their parents.
Yeah.
And Lyle read the screenplay, and that was sort of what informed what they ended up doing. Lyle's like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, well, his screenplay that he wrote was even based on a movie that had come out not long before that called The Billionaire Boys.
Yeah.
You've seen it?
I haven't seen it. I really need to give it a watch.
Yeah, it's a full, the Rat Pack kind of group of, they're all in it, the usual suspects of the late 80s. And it's not bad. It's not bad a movie, but I didn't realize that was even based on a true story itself. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if he's kind of fantasized about what this was, but of doing this for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Eric even confessed to this friend at one point that they'd done the murder not long after the murders. And then the police tried to get that friend to wear a wire and have Eric confess again, and it didn't quite pan out the way they wanted it to.
Yeah, he wouldn't confess the second time.
The police were jaded right from the get-go with this. So
I think the biggest issue was that when the police that did arrive on the scene were the Beverly Hills Police Department. Apparently in Beverly Hills Police Department only have a maximum of about 2 murders a year that they deal with. In comparison, the LAPD, if they had arrived, they deal with, was it 3,000?
No, it's about 30 a week.
30 a week, right?
Yeah.
Right. A lot more than the Beverly Hills Police Department. So the Beverly Hills Police Department were a bit more relaxed about this situation in terms of not going by protocol. They weren't experienced enough. So when they arrived, they legitimately just were like, these poor boys, like, you know, who've walked in and found their parents killed. They just took the scene for what it was. And they like, obviously they do all the right things in terms of the scene and protecting that. But with the 2 boys, they didn't separate them. They kept them together. They did take them back to the police station to get statements, but they didn't check them and get them checked for gunshot residue. So they just were considered innocent from the get-go, both of them. So that really, I think, put the investigation on the back foot for the rest of the time. They did not suspect the boys for quite some time.
And then a few things really started falling into place, didn't they?
So they were following this mob route really from the very beginning, not thinking about the boys whatsoever being in relation to this. Not until the boys really started living it up, really, and that sort of red flagged for the police that, hang on a second, that's not typical behaviour of people who have just lost their parents in such horrific circumstances.
Way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So within the first 4 months, they'd spent about $700,000. They bought a gold Rolex each to the tune of $15,000 a piece. Lyle bought a new Porsche Carrera, I think.
Yeah.
And Eric bought a Jeep Wrangler.
Yep.
They bought Armani suits. They bought, an untold amount of
each.
I was going to say they bought a condo each.
Yeah, next door to each other they moved into. So they didn't move back into that house, after that. Fair call.
Fair enough.
Yeah, bought 2 condominiums next door to each other to move into. Yeah. They bought businesses.
And so, they bought businesses and just ran them into the ground or didn't
know what to do. They didn't have
a chat yet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They certainly hadn't inherited any of their father's business acumen.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where that contradiction, though, comes out in that how they were raised. It was such a strict, horrific household in terms of consequences of, the physical nature of consequences and emotional. Outside world beyond what happened in that household, there was zero consequences for these boys in reality. So therefore, be able to function without these parents, picking up the pieces for them sometimes, whatever, they weren't able to survive in that scenario.
No, they weren't. Within the first 6 months of the deaths, they'd spent nearly $1 million.
Oh, God. And that's $1 million in 1989, 1990.
Yeah, that's like $2.5 million now, roughly.
God. I mean, I could, don't get me wrong.
You just need to go to the supermarket and buy a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk these days to spend that. But yeah, they certainly bought whatever they wanted, and that definitely raised suspicions for the police. They rocked up to their parents' memorials, with these new gold Rolexes, these, incredible suits. The police were still processing the crime scene. They turned up to the house and demanded to get their tennis gear because they had a tennis lesson they had to attend, and that was within a day of their parents dying at their hand. But they kind of just went back to BAU and kept going with things. So
fascination in my mind in terms of it's a clear indicator of the kind of abuse that they had, that their brains hadn't fully developed, to me, like to be able to register grief or all these sorts of things of how you they didn't even know how they were supposed to act. Do you know what I mean? Like, a fully functioning brain would go, okay, I did this, but I want anyone to know, and so I know that I've got to act a certain way. They didn't
I've got to
even
lay low.
seem to do that. They had not, their brains, to me, were not fully developed of an 18, 21-year-old. Like, to think, keep it cool.
Yeah, so prior to the murders as well, the boys had broken into like their parents' friends' homes.
Yeah.
And they stole something like $100,000 worth of goods just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Like and Jose bailed them out of that as well. So in order for them not to go to prison, so at the time that they perpetrated these, break and enters, and they were so brazen about it. They'd back a truck up to the people's houses and literally just take out whatever they could get.
Oh my God.
Fill up the truck and move on. Like TVs. I mean, I guess back in the day you didn't have flat screen TVs. It would have been these giant CRT monitors or
big things. Don't forget the remote. I'm lucky to get a remote. It would have been attached, I guess, by a spiral.
Hold on, in the 80s. Oh yeah, actually no, that maybe it would have had the cord attached still.
Probably.
These days would have no idea.
No.
We used to have a Rankarina that you had to get up and like change the channel on that didn't have a remote.
Oh, don't worry. My parents, the TV we had as our family TV. One day we walked through a museum and that TV was in it. We let our parents have that.
Do they still have it to this day?
No.
Can't get the good HD on the old Rankarina.
God, they can't fast forward and replay his news.
Oh, bless. Anyway, so the boys had perpetrated these crimes, and to basically make good on everything, at the time that they perpetrated them, I think Lyle was 19 and Eric was about 17. So Eric wasn't yet of adult age. So Jose decided that Lyle would claim innocence. They'd pin it all on Eric, and because Eric wouldn't go to prison because he was underage and he was a juvenile and first offence and bloody blah, blah. Jose then paid back all of their friends who they'd stolen from, all of them. They just gave them cash to replace everything, just paid them off. And Eric was court ordered to participate in, he got some community service hours, but he was court ordered to participate to receive psychological therapy.
Yes.
And the psychologist who they were introduced to at that time was none other than Dr. Jerome Oziel. So he becomes really important in this case because Jerome saw Eric for during all this time. So from the time when he was about 17 all the way through the murders. And Eric, I guess they, as you would, seeing a psychologist for such an amount of time, they developed a relationship where Eric really, I guess, trusted him and disclosed a lot of information to him, not about the sexual assaults, which is interesting, but other aspects of the abuse were certainly discussed in those sessions. And one day after the murders, Eric, it kind of all got too much for him and he ended up confessing to Dr. Oziel. Unbeknownst to Eric, Dr. Oziel recorded their sessions and I think he did it for everyone. It wasn't just for Eric Menendez. It was just part of, I guess, the way he practiced.
His note.
Yeah. So Eric's confessed to him. Dr. Oziel then basically says that Lyle needs to come down and have a chat as well. Lyle comes down and he is absolutely furious with Eric, furious at the whole situation that Eric's disclosed what they've done. Lyle threatens Dr. Oziel and basically says to him, if you tell anybody that we've done this, you'll end up in the same way.
Well, I think he actually said the words, Eric, we're now going to have to kill him and his family because, so that he'll have to keep him quiet. So it was threatening not only him, but his extended family too, his wife and children. So that was...
Yeah. His wife and children, and unbeknownst to everyone in the situation, Dr. Oziel had a little piece on the side by the name of Judalon Smith. She was his mistress and also a patient of his. So I think that speaks to the, the ethical prowess of this man,
Yeah.
or lack thereof. Like, and he decided that he needed a witness. So if anything did happen to him or to his family, that he wanted the mistress to sit in the waiting room. He'd get Lyle and Eric back and get them to confess again, and, have her, listening through the wall or through the door, so that he had a first-hand witness of what had happened. Judalon agrees to this at the time because she is absolutely infatuated by Dr. Oziel. Excuse me. And what happens next, Meg?
Yep. So, yes, so Judalon listens in. Jerome Oziel, Dr. Jerome, has also told his wife at this point, though, as well, that that Eric has confessed. So he has broken client-patient privilege already by telling other people about this. However, according to Eric, he's only aware that he's told his psychologist, so therefore he's under the impression that that is privileged information. However, the moment Lyle threatened the psychologist, that goes out. Although, so sitting in the waiting room is Judalon listening in. Now, not long after this, the Dr. Jerome actually breaks up with Judalon, and she is furious. She was not happy about that. So
he told her that he was going to leave his family and stuff for her,
as they do.
As they do. He'd been leading her on, and
yeah,
she fully drank the Kool-Aid and thought that he would. So she was absolutely a woman scorned by the time it got to this point.
Yeah. So she decides to take this information to the police. Which, I mean, good on her, really, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he had broken the privilege already by telling her, and so she's not under any obligation to keep this information, nor would it have his wife. So she went to the police and told them about this, and so that gave them enough to arrest the boy, arrest the two brothers. That it was in October, I believe, 90. No,
yeah,
1990. Yeah, they arrested. First of all, they arrested Lyle. Because at the time, Eric was actually in Israel in a tennis tournament. So they had to wait for him to come back from there, and then they arrested him at the airport.
Yeah, so I think Eric voluntarily came back into the country and sort of surrendered, to the police and to the the warrant that was out for his arrest.
Yes. So from there, basically, though, because the main evidence they had was the fact that there was a confession, it went through the Supreme Court for like 2 years with the an appeal on whether or not this information could be used at trial. Yeah. So from basically once they got through all that, and the decision was that those tapes could be used, and that Jerome Oziel would be subpoenaed, as well as his notes, all those sorts of things. He would have to testify. And not perjure himself, and obviously be honest around what had happened. He then was given a date for trial. So I think it was 3 years past by the time they actually had a date for trial. So basically they started out, the boys, going into court wearing these Armani suits, probably the ones that they'd bought with the money after the parents' death, and looking quite sharp and a little bit arrogant, grinning, having a bit of a laugh or whatever here or there. And then they managed to get hold of a lawyer by the name of Leslie Abramson, who, as we were talking earlier, was depicted by Edie Falcone in that series, the Law and Order series.
That's
so,
it.
And she was incredible, a great lawyer. She did her absolute amazing job in this. And what she did was, when they came when it came to trial, she had changed their appearance entirely, in that they were wearing pastels and
little
shirt collars coming out, and she would purposely touch them all the time, make them appear very human, and very
childlike,
very childlike. Yeah, so it was very purposeful what she had done there to portray these boys. She was portraying them as boys and not as monsters. To really, I guess, sway a
And
jury.
she even kept referring to them as the boys, the boys, the boys.
Yeah, which, I mean, they were grown men by this point, both of
They were
them.
men.
They were in in their 20s at this point. I know at one stage, Eric, there was a quote out of the Barbara Walters interview where he said, "I'm just a normal kid," and he was 25 when he said that. I found that a bit unnerving, to be honest. I just sort of thought, no, you're a man.
But their emotional growth, I guess, and is stunted.
Yeah.
I mean, through the trauma of what they'd experienced throughout their life. It doesn't surprise me that they still see themselves as children. I sometimes can't believe that I'm an adult.
Should I be?
What a weight, I've got responsibilities. Like, what?
I know, yeah.
Yeah, it's... that didn't surprise me.
Yep.
I think Leslie had a really lovely relationship with the men, with the Menendez brothers, with the brothers. He fought for them like they were her own children, I think. And she really believed that had they not been abused, this would never have happened. And so she argued, you know, with everything she had to really make the jury see, you know, see the situation for what it was. And interestingly, the boys actually had their own jury in this first trial. So there were two separate juries, a jury for Lyle, a jury for Eric. And if there was testimony to be heard that only pertained to Lyle, Eric's jurors had to file out of the court. You know, it would have been such a disruptive way. I don't know why they did that, but it would have been such a disruptive way of running the trial.
Absolutely.
But as it turned out, both juries came back deadlocked.
I can't believe that happened. Like, I mean, it must have been, to me, it has to be something to do with how it functioned for them to come back with that. I don't understand. I mean, they were basically, the fact of the matter is they were saying they were guilty. They weren't saying they were innocent. They were basically just trying to argue the fact that it was a defensive act, and therefore manslaughter, and not first-degree murder. Although at this first trial, there was no clear indication of that from the judge in terms of I don't think he made it clear enough what they could come back with. It was all on the table, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think for the first trial, everything was on the table. So it really gave the jury open slather.
But they couldn't.
That doesn't really surprise me that they couldn't then all come to an agreement.
Because the prosecution was disgusting.
It was awful.
Yeah, and look, it was the time. I get that to a degree. Obviously, the quote was, "Men can't be raped because they don't have the equipment to be raped." What though? She also made a lot of allusions to Eric being gay and that he wanted to be sodomized because he was gay. And she, very much portrayed the fact of that he had to be gay because he obviously enjoyed it, because otherwise he would have told his dad to stop and made sure it didn't happen because he was because of what his age was and stuff. But, which just,
I mean, the boys in their testimony spoke about how they would bleed when it happened. He not only sodomized them, he also forced them to perform oral sex on him. Oh, the acts were actually horrific.
And I mean, none of that makes you gay. Who cares if you're gay? It has no
bearing on it
in that conversation whatsoever. But to make statements men can't be raped.
It's incest, regardless of the gender of the child and the perpetrator.
I mean, I know that Lyle has said, I wonder if we would have been seen differently, and if he would have been seen differently if he was protecting a sister. And I have to agree with him on a level that I think society would have seen this a lot more differently if he was protecting a girl over his younger brother, which is just that's not okay in my mind.
I hope we've come beyond that now in this day and age.
Yeah, I think some of us.
Stop blaming the victims. Yeah. Stop it. That's we don't do that. No, I think a hard no.
There's enough evidence of this being known to have been happening, as in, no, of course no one witnessed it other than Kitty, who is also dead. But there's enough evidence of the behaviour of the boys. If we had psychologists up on the stand, I'm sure they would talk to the fact of okay, they hadn't treated the boys, but that there are certainly behaviours that indicate potentially abuse.
Yeah.
But also the first-hand evidence from cousins who are your first friends in life. They had information. There was one of the boys' cousins who said that there was just a known rule that if Jose was up in the bedroom with one of the boys, you didn't walk down the hallway.
Oh.
So there was something going on that shouldn't have been. You know, there's enough there to know that these boys were not making this up. And I think, again, it was in the Barbara Walters interview where she asked a question which, look, I didn't like her. She was quite aggressive with them and clearly thought they were guilty as fuck.
I did not like that interview at all.
But yeah, she asked a question that I wanted asked, but she just did it in a way I just like. But she asked Eric, that she obviously felt you felt comfortable enough to confess to your therapist about murdering your parents, but you never felt comfortable enough with him to confess about the sexual abuse. And his response to that was shame. It's like, wow, you felt less shame around killing your parents than the sexual abuse. Yeah. Which says so much.
Yeah.
To me, that speaks volumes that, you know, it's that whole, you know, women wanting to be in the woods with a bear rather than a man, that, you know, the on effect of abuse is worse than being killed. You know?
My God, that's heavy, isn't it?
It is.
That's really, really heavy.
Yeah.
Oh, these poor boys. I mean, I guess following the deadlock jury, that, you know, both trials were ended in a mistrial, and so they had to go to trial again. The mistrial occurred in January 1994, and they weren't retried until the end of 1995, and it didn't conclude until 1996. So this is, 7 years after the
7
murders.
years after. It's crazy, isn't it?
It's a long time.
Yeah.
This time, they had the same judge presiding. There was only one jury for both of them, and the judge decided that the sexual abuse testimony was inadmissible.
Which I'm shocked at why that couldn't be. Yeah, I'm in two minds about it.
I think it should have been allowed.
It goes to
their motive. Yeah.
Guess what I'm in two minds about? Because so the judge decided that there was only two outcomes being possible, one being manslaughter and the other being first-degree murder.
Yeah.
Which ultimately the jury came back, it was conclusive. Unanimous, sorry. That it was first-degree murder, and therefore both the boys received 2 life sentences.
Yeah. Without the possibility of parole.
Without parole. Whereas if they had gotten manslaughter, there would have been at least a parole point put in there.
Yeah. I think the maximum sentence for manslaughter at the time was 30 years.
Right. So they could have got 2 lots of that, but still with a parole period, I'm guessing. Yeah. Which means that there was a chance they could have got out at some point in their lifetimes, whereas now they won't. And also the death sentence was also as a possibility that had to be decided upon after the fact. So that with the first degree murder being the conviction, what do you reckon on manslaughter versus?
Well, it's really interesting because in my mind, manslaughter to me is where there's no premeditation, no planning. You've just killed somebody in the heat of the moment, or reacting to something, or defending yourself in a whatever. And so from just thinking about it purely from that perspective, the boys 100%, the men, 100% premeditated this. They purchased guns. They then, after the fact, they've disposed of the weapons, they've had a shower, they've disposed of their clothes, they've come up with a story, they've led the police on this wild goose chase to find these mobsters who didn't, well, I'm sure they exist, but but who had no involvement in the crime. So at that level, I see it. I see the fact that yes, absolutely, the jury had to convict them of first-degree murder, but and also taking into account that this particular jury weren't allowed to take into account any of the abuse allegations. But knowing what we know, given the abuse, I just don't. I don't think they should have been convicted.
Yeah,
life in prison.
So I think,
but then also, the other thing is, at no point is it okay to kill another human being. You know, they had they might have had to have started with nothing, with no money, and started from the bottom up and really forged a life for themselves, but they could get away. They were adults, but then they were also groomed from the time that they were children, and they probably didn't have the capability, emotionally to be able to, or even like mentally, to be able to plan that and forge that path for themselves. So I really don't know. That's the answer.
I'm the same in some sense. I do feel like they got what they deserved with a first-degree murder conviction. I have all empathy for the abuse that they had, but ultimately there are other options. No, they're not easy routes to take, but I think that there were options prior to before killing their parents. I really do think that they weren't complete and utter idiots. They did have access to family who clearly knew what was going on.
Well, their families still stand by them to this day. So their aunties and uncles, like the brothers and sisters of Jose and Kitty, stand by them to this day.
Yeah. I think that they would have, if they had just stepped away for like 5 minutes and thought to themselves, hey, if Dad does go ape, we'll be at, Auntie so-and-so's house or, Uncle so-and-so's house to protect us. We'll contact the police, we'll out this to the world and Dad will be done, kind of thing.
That would never have happened though.
You don't reckon?
No.
What do you think would have happened?
Well, I just don't think, I think they were groomed to the point where they just knew they couldn't put that out there.
Yeah. But I mean, they could have just walked away. I don't know. Though. As in, like, instead taking money.
That's absolutely what they should have done.
Yeah.
They didn't.
They didn't. Yeah.
And so I agree that they ended up where they needed to be. And they even say that in that interview with Barbara Walters. They fully accept that what they did was the wrong thing.
Yeah.
They wish they hadn't done it. And they understand why they are where they are.
Yeah. I mean, I know the other outcome of this, and Eric has certainly admitted to this, that if he didn't kill his parents, he would have killed himself, which is just horrendous to think.
I think he even said in that interview that he wishes he had.
He wanted to wishes he'd trade places with them.
Mm.
And I get that's not an outcome. It's not the right outcome either. No one wants anyone dead out of this. But I don't know how you then say that that's okay to premeditate and murder your parents for what they did, and then say that that's only manslaughter. Like, to me, it breaks the rule of what manslaughter and what the difference between manslaughter and first-degree murder are.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a big wave at the moment, it's TikTok generation, wanting to try and get them out of jail based on some new evidence that's come forward. But I just don't know if there's enough in it that would change the outcome.
The evidence that's come to light is that back when Jose was a record executive with RCA Records, they had a band on their books called Menudo. Were they a Puerto Rican band?
Puerto Rico, yeah.
You remember? Yeah. One of the band members, Roy Rosello, has come out to say that during their time there that Jose raped him.
Yeah.
Roy also claims that there was, I think it was their band manager, was also like raping him consistently throughout that period as well.
Yeah, he was only like 14, I think.
He was 14. And so, look, we know there's a lot of research that's been done about disclosure of sexual abuse, especially in men.
Yeah.
And I think I read somewhere that the average reporting time is something like 30 years. So the fact that this is coming out now doesn't surprise me.
No.
And the fact that it didn't come out back then doesn't surprise me. And we talked about that. There was the shame of it, that Eric didn't even confess to his therapist who he'd confessed murder to. He hadn't confessed his sexual abuse. You know, there's a lot of evidence to support why this Roy hasn't come forward, before now.
I get that would then well, see, I don't know whether that's enough to then have a retrial to say, the sexual abuse needs to come into it, have a retrial. unfortunately, Roy's probably never going to get the justice he deserves because, he's already dead, which that's shit. But I think that unfortunately the ship has sailed on that. Unfortunately. I don't think that's enough to warrant a retrial.
I think the hope is, I think what they're hoping is that would potentially render the sexual abuse of Lyle and Eric admissible if this Roy was happy to testify, on their behalf. Look, from everything I've been reading about it, it doesn't look likely they're going to get a retrial anytime
that
soon.
Call, he already heard all the evidence of it in the first trial. He made a decision for whatever reason. He didn't want that in the second trial.
Yeah.
I mean, to agree or disagree with that decision now or back then is the same. It's the same to me. I don't see him going all of a sudden, or, a judge turn around and saying, there'll be lengthy notes as to why that judge made that decision. And so I can't see another judge stepping in now and saying, this random other person who was abused by, which again, you'd have to prove it, which, I hate that fact of I believe the victim, but there would need to be evidence of that occurring for it to then be valid to come into the trial. And not only that, there's got to be a link there of a bit more, I think, of...
Well, there is one other piece of evidence that's come to light that may speak to that, and that is a letter that Lyle wrote to his cousin back when he was 8 or 9 years of age, I think. And in that letter, he discloses the abuse.
So I think that's got more water in it than, unfortunately. It's got more attachment to this story.
Yeah, and only recently has the cousin found this letter, which is why it's sort of going around, and that's sort of that combined with this, this confession or this revelation by Roy Rosello.
Yeah.
Those two things together, the family. I find this really interesting that the family, so Kitty's sister, Jose's sister and brother, I believe, all think the boys have done enough. The boys, they're men. The Menendez brothers have done enough time.
Yeah.
And they should be let out.
Well, they're now 56 and 53. Look, are they going to offend again? I don't think so. I
don't think so.
I think they certainly they killed the people that they felt threatened by. I don't feel they're a threat to general society.
No.
At the same time, you're playing with fire in our justice, or not our justice system, but it's American justice system, by backflipping on these rulings without solid reason.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. Although, look, the brothers have made something of themselves a little bit in prison too. They've both got degrees. They've both gotten married.
At that point,
which I just find it so friggin' bizarre. Who would be like, oh yeah, I'll marry an inmate? There's no physical intimacy in those relationships.
You and I are we're true crime addicts, right? But there is no way, and there is nothing in me that makes me go, I might write a letter to an inmate, and then fall in love with them. No, I can't come at that. I know that there's a real phenomenon behind all of that. I just don't get it. Because Eric ended up marrying Anna Erickson, I think it was her name, not long after them being convicted. And then that ended pretty soon. And then he ended up marrying another woman by the name of she's Tammy Menendez. In 1999, they're still married.
That's Eric.
Yes, Eric.
Eric married Tammy.
Yeah, Eric. And
but
then
Lyle's the one who's had two marriages. Lyle married Anna Erickson.
Eric married, the wrong way around.
And then Lyle married Rebecca Sneed in 2003. And Rebecca's actually got a daughter, and she takes her daughter to visit him in prison every week.
But it's obviously not Lyle's.
No, it's not. They haven't been able to,
So she was
seal the deal, if you catch my drift.
Okay.
Yeah, she had a child previously to this relationship.
She's got to be in her 20, well into her 20s, if not her 30s now. Hey, crazy. Because they married in 2003, her and Lyle.
2003, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I just don't get that. But anyway, each their own.
A few just last little things to sort of tidy it up a bit.
Yeah.
The house that they lived in Beverly Hills, where the parents were murdered, was previously owned by Elton John, Prince, and Michael Jackson.
Yes. Yeah.
Michael, what? So that gives you an idea of the caliber of this house.
But that wasn't actually their house. I believe they were potentially renting that place because they were renovating their place in Calabasas.
I thought they sold the place in Calabasas because that's where the boys perpetrated that crime against all their friends.
No.
And they're like, oh, we've got to get the shit out of here because nobody will want us in Calabasas anymore.
Yeah, no, they were having like full renos done of their, like, because that's the place in Beverly Hills was actually quite small. That's where they like were shot, in that den. It was quite a small little room, whereas in their Calabasas home, it was huge.
Grand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting. And in terms of the rest of the money of the family, like we spoke about the fact that they couldn't find a lot of it, or a lot of what was suspected to have been there. But the rest of the money that was left over just went to the lawyers. Like there's actually nothing left now.
No. Maybe, well, there is, and leave it with me. We got any tips on which country it might be in first? No, I can't start with you.
Not that I've been able to find. Having said that, I haven't gone deep into it because, you know, time and kids and, you know, life. But you just use your little hyperfixation and get into that for us and report back.
Yes, but I have another little tidbit for you before we go too. Oh yes. So in their spending spree between having just murdered their parents and before they were arrested, the boys were living it up, and they went to quite a few basketball games. And in particular, one basketball game they were at was with the New York Knicks, and they got courtside tickets to this game, and they have been immortalized on a game player's trading card. So in the background of a Mark Jackson trading card for basketball for the New York Knicks, you will see, sitting courtside, Lyle and Eric Menendez.
That is gold.
We will put a picture of it on our socials for you, everyone. It is absolutely amazing. But the thing is, eBay have got so annoyed with this because this card goes for a pretty little penny these days, but eBay don't like this card, and to post it on eBay for it to get sold without eBay taking it down, you have to post it with like remove the image of Eric and Lyle, and they don't mention them at all within the post. But so you've got to just know what card it is you're after to be able to get it. But I think it goes for about $1,500. This card, it's amazing. You're on mute.
Sorry, I had to cough. I'm really sorry. Did they have to sell it because it's like a proceeds? Sorry, does eBay not let them sell it because it's like a proceeds of crime thing? Or like, why?
The reasoning behind that is that eBay apparently in 2018 just started going, no, you're not selling that on here, and started removing it.
Interesting. Well, we'll definitely pop a photo of that up on our socials because that is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine being the person like looking at this trading card and going, hang on a minute, I know those two faces.
Because they were everywhere, weren't they? Like they were on TV. Yeah. The whole trial, the whole first trial. The second trial wasn't broadcast at all, but the whole first trial was.
Yeah. Oh, their faces that these faces. Yeah. I mean, they look quite close.
Do you find you look at photos of them now and you're like, hold on, wait, which one's which?
A little bit. You actually see the similarity now between them. I think even particularly now, like because Lyle's bald. But even then, I'm like, they're spitting image. Like the two of them, they're such brothers. They really do look very similar. Yeah. But the thing, people were like, women in particular, they were outside the courtroom and stuff. They were like swooning after these two.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I don't get it either.
My crush on Daryl Braithwaite was far more healthy. Okay.
The fact that you bring up your crush on Daryl Braithwaite all the time is probably less than healthy. I won't get into who I had a crush on in 1989. Probably 1989. So I would have been 4. It was probably John from Play School.
Well, that's creepy, actually.
Oh, he was lovely.
Yeah, but he's a bad figure. So's Daryl Braithwaite.
Yeah, hello, Daryl Braithwaite, mate. Oh my god.
At least he sang good songs. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah, true. So did John.
There's a bear in there. It's a little bit different.
Well, I think that's probably a good place for us to leave off because
crazies are setting in.
It's late. But thank you everybody for joining us. If you could please, subscribe to our podcast on whatever app you're listening to this on. It really, really helps us get more listeners, and the more listeners we get, the more episodes we can bring you. And we've got a few really exciting things in the works. So stay tuned for updates as we go along. Yeah. We will be back next week with a new episode. So thank you everybody for listening.
And a real quick shout out.
Oh yes, I forgot the shout out. Sorry everybody.
No, we've had some really great comments on posts recently, particularly around our second episode, JonBenet, Mad on YouTube, and also Spotify. I think this comment particularly came from. That we've just had some really, people really responding to us, which is so amazing. And it's not even my mum. It's like someone we don't know.
It's not even my mum. Well, firstly, I don't think Pat would actually know how to respond on Spotify. Love you, Pat. Love you. But,
Well, especially when she was like, I just see your faces. I don't get to hear it. Well, Mum, that's because your volume's not up.
And she's gorgeous.
So yeah, no, this one's not from Patty. It's actually from Moondogs AU. So thank you very much, Moondogs. And the comment is another great episode. I was listening in bed and went to reply out loud as I felt like I could just join in. Can't wait for next week's episode, ladies. So thank you, Moondogs. That is brilliant. Please just chime in. Please do add your comments. We want the conversation continuing after our episode. So we really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We love it. And thank you everybody for listening. And we'll see you next week for the next one.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Stay curious, crime besties.